Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. The late autumn sun slanted through the windows of the Brooklyn brownstone, casting long, golden rays across the hardwood floors. Elise Morgan sat alone at the kitchen table, fingers curled around a chipped ceramic mug, steam rising in soft curls from the untouched coffee inside. The air in the house was heavy, not with tension, but with something denser, more intimate. A silence that had waited for years to be acknowledged. She hadn't been back here in nearly 4 years. Outside, the city buzzed and groaned with familiar rhythm, horns blaring down Flatbush Avenue, children laughing in the park across the street, the distant hum of the Q train rising and falling like breath. But within the walls of the brownstone, time seemed to hold its breath. The last time Elise had stepped foot in this house, her suitcase had been packed with more than clothes. It had held the unsaid, the unresolved, the unbearable. She had left without looking back, severing ties not with anger, but with a numb kind of exhaustion. Now she was back, not for a celebration, not for a reconciliation, but because of a voicemail that had slipped through the cracks of her carefully built world. Elise, it's Mom. Just call me when you get this, okay? Aye. The message had ended in static, as if the phone couldn't bear to hold more. She didn't call back. She packed, booked a one-way ticket from Seattle, and showed up on the doorstep 48 hours later with her life crammed into a single suitcase and a backpack. Her mother had answered the door with quiet surprise. No hug, no tears, just a hesitant step back and a whispered, "Come in." Now, 20 hours later, Elise still hadn't unpacked. Across the table, Julian, her younger brother, slouched in the chair he used to sit in during high school study sessions. His fingers tapped an uneven rhythm on the edge of the table, an old habit when he was nervous. He looked older than she remembered. A beard shaded his jaw, his frame broader, his expression more closed. "Elise," he said quietly after a long silence. She looked up. "Yeah, Mom told me about the hospital visit." He hesitated. "Last month." She didn't want to, but I pushed. Elise nodded slowly, eyes dropping to the swirling steam above her coffee. "How bad?" she asked. Julian rubbed the back of his neck. "Not nothing." A tight knot formed in her chest. "She says she's fine," Julian added. "But we both know she's never been good at telling the truth when it comes to her health." "Or anything," Elise muttered. Julian winced slightly but didn't argue. He knew. He'd been there too, living in the echoes Elise had tried to escape. "Why now?" she asked. Julian shrugged. "Maybe she just wants to make things right. Before she can't." The words sat between them, soft and sharp. After Julian left to get groceries, Elise wandered the house. Her footsteps echoed lightly against the worn floors. Every corner was a memory. The old upright piano still sat by the window, yellowing sheet music resting on the stand. In the hallway, a series of school photos hung in mismatched frames. Hers stopped at 2014. In her childhood bedroom, dust motes danced in the light. The bookshelf still held her annotated copy of Jane Eyre, dog-eared and underlined. On the desk was the lamp she used to study under for late-night exams, the base still scratched from when she knocked it over during a panic attack junior year. Elise sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled slowly. She had run far and fast, and for good reason. The expectations, the quiet judgments, the suffocating pressure to be someone who smiled through her own unraveling. But even she couldn't deny what brought her back now, not guilt, not duty. Something quieter. Something that sounded like hope. Evening fell gently. Elise heard the front door creak open and footsteps shuffled in. Her mother didn't call out. Elise followed the sound and found her in the living room, sitting with her back to the doorway, staring at the old fireplace. "Mom?" She turned, slowly. Her face was drawn but soft. She wore the same maroon sweater she always wore when the nights turned cold. "You still hate tea," her mother said. Elise blinked. "I made coffee instead. There's a fresh pot in the kitchen." A small, Surprised smile tugged at Elise's lips. "Thanks," she said, voice low. "Sit with me." Elise crossed the room and lowered herself into the armchair across from her. The quiet between them was filled with the crackling of old wood settling and the distant rumble of the city outside. "I never thought you'd come back," her mother said. "Neither did I. I kept the postcards," she said. "Every one you sent. Even the one from Colorado with the mountain goat on the front." Elise chuckled softly. "That goat tried to chase me. I figured. Your handwriting was panicked." They both laughed, and it broke something open. Her mother reached forward, gently, and laid a small, weathered envelope on the table between them. "I wrote you letters," she said. "Never mailed them. I didn't know where you were half the time, but I wrote them anyway." Elise stared at the envelope. "You could read them later. Or not at all. But I needed you to know. I was trying in my own way." Elise nodded. "No promises. But no refusals either." Her mother leaned back. "You don't have to stay forever. Just long enough to remember that we were once more than the silence." For the first time in a long while, Elise believed it might be possible. Outside, the wind whispered down the street. The brownstones stood still, but inside, something had shifted. She wasn't home. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, she was on her way. Chapter 2. The Shape of Memory. Rain tapped lightly against the windows the next morning, soft and steady, like a reminder that time was still moving forward. Elise lay awake in her childhood bed, the sheets unfamiliar, the ceiling above her unchanged. The scent of old books and lavender lingered in the air, a scent that belonged to this house and somehow still clung to her skin. She got up before the sun rose, out of habit more than anything. Her internal clock had never quite adjusted to peace, always conditioned to chase something, deadlines, expectations, the illusion of distance. But here, in this in-between space, there was nowhere to run. In the kitchen, her mother was already standing at the stove, the same navy robe wrapped around her as when Elise was a child. A pot of oatmeal simmered, and the kettle let out a low, whispering hiss. There was no music, no television, just the hush of the house and the rain outside. "Couldn't sleep?" her mother asked without turning around. "Didn't try very hard," Elise said, reaching for 2 mugs. They didn't talk for a while. They didn't need to. There was something healing in the rhythm of ordinary things, the way spoons clinked against bowls, how sugar was passed across the table without being asked for. It reminded Elise of mornings long ago, before adolescence had cracked everything open. After breakfast, Elise took a walk. Brooklyn had changed. Or maybe it hadn't, and she had. The bakery down the block had a new mural painted on its side, a splash of oranges and deep blues, sunflowers rising from the cracked concrete. The corner store still had the same bell on its door, and the same elderly man behind the counter who nodded at her with vague recognition. She ended up in Prospect Park on a bench near the lake. The air was damp, and her coat wasn't quite warm enough, but she didn't mind. She watched a dog chase leaves, a couple arguing quietly near a tree, a jogger who waved at her like they'd met before. In the stillness, she let herself remember. The birthday when her father hadn't come home. The first time she stayed out all night without calling. Her mother's voice, choked and raw, screaming, "You don't get to disappear just because it's hard." And Elise, 17 and furious, had shouted back, "Watch me." She hadn't meant to break anything, but she had, and some of it had never healed right. Later that afternoon, Elise and Julian sat on the rooftop with coffee in mismatched mugs. The rain had stopped, and the sky had opened into a soft gray canvas above them. "Remember when we used to sneak up here to watch the fireworks?" he asked. Elise smiled. And Mom would pretend she didn't know. Julian leaned back. She knew. She just liked hearing us laugh. A pause. "I'm glad you're back," he said. "Even if it's just for now." "I don't know what I'm doing," Elise admitted. "I don't know how to be here without falling apart." Julian sipped his coffee. "Maybe falling apart isn't the worst thing. Maybe it's how you rebuild." Elise looked at him, the weight of years softening in her chest. "You got wise." He laughed. "Yeah, I had to. Someone had to stay behind and keep the lights on." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't press or demand. The kind that felt like permission. That night, Elise found the envelope her mother had given her. She sat on her bed, legs tucked beneath her, and opened it. Inside were 5 letters. One for her 18th birthday. One after she moved to Portland. One from the year Elise hadn't called home, not even for the holidays. One from the day her mother had been diagnosed. And one marked simply, "If you ever come home." The handwriting was careful, but shaky in places. The ink smudged in spots. They weren't apologies exactly, but they weren't excuses either. They were confessions in lowercase letters, pieces of truth strung together like fragile thread. "I didn't know how to reach you without breaking what was left. You were always so strong, and I forgot that strength can hide pain. I loved you, even in the silence. Especially in the silence." Tears came slowly, not loud or desperate, but quiet, like rain on the rooftop. Elise folded the letters and placed them back inside the envelope. She didn't know what came next. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to find out. Chapter 3, Where the Walls Remember. By the 3rd day, the brownstone no longer felt like a stranger's house. It didn't feel like home either, not quite. But Elise had stopped flinching at every creak in the floorboards, had stopped tiptoeing around like a guest. She made coffee without asking where the filters were. She walked barefoot down the hall. She even sang softly to herself while brushing her teeth, unaware until she caught her reflection smiling back at her in the mirror. Small things, but they mattered. That morning, she found her mother standing at the hallway closet, boxes piled around her feet. "I figured," her mother said, "if you're going to be here a while, I could use your help clearing out some of this old stuff." Elise raised an eyebrow. "Did Julian say no?" "Julian avoids closets. He says they smell like mothballs and repressed trauma." Elise laughed, actually laughed. Her mother looked momentarily stunned, then smiled. Together, they sat on the floor, surrounded by years pressed into cardboard and dust. There were photo albums, pages stuck together, corners curling, childhood captured in fading Polaroids. Elise as a toddler in a Halloween bee costume. Julian missing both front teeth at a science fair. Their parents, younger and unburdened, dancing in the backyard one summer evening. What happened to them? Elise asked, tracing her father's face with a fingertip. Her mother didn't answer right away. Then, softly, life, grief, time. He stopped trying, Elise said. Her mother closed the album. So did I. Just in different ways. They found boxes of old letters, receipts from family trips, postcards from places they never went. And then, at the bottom of one worn box, Elise found something that made her breath catch, her old journals. She had thought they were gone, tossed, burned, buried with the girl she used to be. She turned to a page dated the summer, after her high school graduation. I'm leaving and no one's stopping me. I don't know if that's freedom or failure. She didn't say anything, just closed the cover gently and set it aside. They worked for hours, stopping only when the sunlight began to slip down the walls and the house turned gold and quiet again. Julian came home with pizza, and the three of them ate at the dining room table, elbows touching, laughter echoing in the corners that had once held only silence. Later that night, Elise wandered into the attic. She hadn't been up there since she was 15, the summer she built a tiny reading nook under the rafters to escape the world. The space was musty and cluttered, but it welcomed her. Dust hung in the air like memory. In the far corner, tucked beneath a moth-eaten quilt, she found a box she didn't recognize. Inside was a collection of cassette tapes, hand-labeled in her father's blocky script. For Elise, Volume 1. Snow Days and Sad Songs. July 1998. You laughed so loud. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the tiny portable player beside them. She clicked the first tape into place and pressed play. The soft hiss of static filled the room. Then a voice, young, warm, laughing. Her father's voice. If you're listening to this, it means you found the old tapes. It means you still remember. Hi, kid. I hope you're somewhere warm. Or at least with good coffee. Elise sat down hard, the floor grounding her. This one's for the nights you couldn't sleep. For when you felt like no one understood you. I probably didn't. But I wanted to. God, I wanted to. Music began to play. A Simon and Garfunkel song. The one he used to hum when driving her to school. Tears came suddenly, and Elise didn't stop them. They weren't just for the man who vanished slowly from their lives, or the girl who stopped waiting for him. They were for everything in between. The missed chances. The unfinished sentences. The way silence had become their only language. And yet here it was a proof that he'd tried. That he'd left behind something real, even if it was only bits of magnetic tape and old love songs. The tape clicked as it ended. Elise sat still. She didn't feel healed. Not completely. But for the first time, she didn't feel broken either. She stood, gathered the box of tapes, and carried them downstairs. When her mother saw her, she froze. Her eyes went wide at the sight of the box in Elise's arms. I didn't know they were up there, her mother whispered. He never told me. Elise nodded. He didn't have to. And that night, the three of them sat on the living room floor, Elise, Julian, and their mother, listening to the voice of a man they all missed in different ways. Not talking, not explaining, just listening. Chapter 4. The Sound of Old Songs. Rain tapped gently against the windows the next morning, a steady rhythm that matched Elise's heartbeat as she stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal. The brownstone felt quieter than usual, but not in the heavy, unspeakable way it used to. This quiet felt lived in, comforting, like a shared breath after a long conversation. Julian wandered in, hair sticking up at odd angles. He grabbed a banana from the counter and raised an eyebrow. You're cooking. Don't sound so shocked, Elise muttered, nudging the pot. I lived alone for years, you know. Yeah, but your text said things like, just had cereal for dinner again. Adulting. She gave him a look. He shrugged, peeling the banana. It's good to see you like this. Like, not clenched. I was clenched. Like a human fist. She cracked a reluctant smile. Their mother entered a few minutes later, wearing her worn, gray cardigan and slippers that barely made a sound. She looked between the two of them, then stepped toward the cupboard. There's no more brown sugar, she said. Elise handed her the last jar. I put it aside. Her mother blinked, then nodded, silently measuring that small act of care. They sat at the table together, eating quietly, and when Julian offered to play one of the tapes again, neither Elise nor her mother said no. Her father's voice floated through the speakers, reading old poems, cracking jokes in a voice full of quiet effort. There were pauses in the recordings where he seemed to lose track of what he wanted to say, little edits that never made it out. Elise found herself listening not just for what he said, but for what he left unsaid. The sighs, the hesitation, the longing. After breakfast, Julian left to meet an old college friend in the city. Elise lingered in the living room, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, until her mother joined her again. Do you remember when you were little? Her mother said slowly, and you'd stand on that windowsill pretending to direct traffic? Elise laughed. I thought the people would listen if I waved dramatically enough. You were always trying to fix things. I still am, Elise said. Her mother looked at her, a softness in her eyes. You don't have to fix me. The words settled over the room like the rain. Elise hesitated. But I want to understand. Her mother sat down across from her, hands folded in her lap. There's so much I didn't say back then, she said. So much I didn't know how to say. Your father, he slipped away a little at a time. I tried to hold it together, for you and Julian. But I wasn't enough. And I blamed myself. You didn't talk to us, Elise said. You shut down. I know. And I'm sorry. I thought protecting you meant pretending things were fine. Elise nodded, her throat tight. I needed you to see me. And you didn't. I see you now. It was the simplest of exchanges, but it cracked something open between them. A window that had been sealed shut for years now opened just enough to let in a breeze. Later that afternoon, Elise walked through the neighborhood with an umbrella. She passed the park where she and Julian used to play tag, the corner deli that still had the same sun-faded Pepsi sign, the laundromat where she once spilled an entire bottle of detergent and cried because she thought the world was ending. She stopped at the bookstore near Flatbush Avenue, the one with the uneven shelves and the grumpy cat who always slept in the poetry section. Inside, the cat was still there. Older, slower, but still judging. Elise wandered the aisles and picked out a book of modern poetry. At the register, the clerk asked if she was visiting. She paused. Not exactly. Back home, she found her mother sitting in the kitchen, sorting through a worn recipe box. I thought I'd make that lemon chicken you used to like, she said without looking up. I'd love that. They cooked together for the first time in years. Elise chopped herbs. Her mother zested lemons. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to. The sound of knives against cutting boards and water boiling on the stove said enough. That evening, over dinner, they didn't listen to tapes or tiptoe around the fragile parts of their lives. They just sat, ate, passed bread, laughed at an old story Julian told about falling off the subway platform when he was 12. Elise caught her mother watching her at one point, and when their eyes met, her mother smiled, really smiled, in a way that seemed to say, I'm still learning. But I'm here. The rain had stopped. The city outside shimmered in puddles and lamplight. The brownstone didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt, for a moment, like a house learning how to be a home again. Chapter 5. Letters in the Quiet. Elise found herself waking before dawn more often now. Not from nightmares or the restless unease that used to claw at her chest in the dark, but from something gentler, a kind of expectancy she couldn't explain. The house, still cloaked in pre-sunrise blue, was hushed and soft, like it, too, was holding its breath. She pulled a sweater over her t-shirt and padded quietly down the stairs, careful not to wake her mother or Julian. In the kitchen, she brewed a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the first light stretch across the sidewalk like tentative fingers. And then, for reasons she couldn't name, she opened the envelope. It had been sitting on her nightstand since her mother placed it there 3 days earlier, one of the letters her mother had written and never sent. Elise had been avoiding it, afraid of what it might stir. But now, in the tender quiet of morning, she unfolded the page. Dear Elise, if you're reading this, maybe you've come home. Maybe you haven't. I don't know what your world looks like anymore. I only know that mine has had a daughter-shaped space in it for years, and I never found a way to fill it except with silence. I was afraid. Afraid of saying the wrong thing. Afraid of watching you slip away the way your father did, slowly, quietly, without explanation. You both had that same look in your eyes when you were hurting. Like you wanted to disappear without a trace, so no one would see the unraveling. But I saw it. I always saw it. I just didn't know what to do. I know you think I failed you. And you're not wrong. But failure doesn't mean I didn't love you. It only means I didn't know how to show it in the moments that mattered most. Elise stopped, her eyes blurring. She pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. When she heard soft footsteps on the stairs, she quickly folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. Couldn't sleep either? Her mother asked as she entered the kitchen, tying her robe. Just woke up early. Her mother poured herself tea and sat across from her, silence stretching comfortably between them. Finally, her mother spoke. I think we should go see him today. Elise looked up. The cemetery, her mother added. You haven't been, have you? Elise shook her head. I wasn't sure I could. Her mother reached across the table, not touching her, just resting her hand nearby. "We can go together." They took the train out just after noon, the ride quiet, full of small scenery and unsaid thoughts. When they arrived, the autumn air was crisp, and the wind had that clean bite that came just before winter. The cemetery was tucked between a row of sycamore trees and a stone wall, the kind of place that felt removed from time. They walked the path slowly, leaves crunching underfoot. Elise found the headstone before her mother pointed it out. Thomas Morgan, beloved father, beloved man. 1959 to 2019. In the quiet, "I am with you." The quote, she realized, was one of his. From a cassette she hadn't yet listened to. Her breath caught. Her mother stood beside her, arms folded tightly around herself. "I visit once a month," she said quietly. "Sometimes less when I'm angry, but I always come back." Elise knelt beside the stone and placed a folded slip of paper beneath the small vase of sun-bleached flowers. Not a letter, just a page from one of her journals. She didn't reread it. She didn't need to. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. The wind blew softly through the trees. Elise closed her eyes and imagined his voice. Not how it had sounded at the end, worn thin and tired, but how it had been when he told her bedtime stories or sang off-key on road trips. They stayed there for a while, not speaking, just remembering. That evening, back at the brownstone, Julian was waiting with dinner already cooking and a bottle of wine uncorked. They ate together, elbows brushing, the clinking of silverware filling the silences that didn't need to be fixed. Afterward, Elise stepped into the hallway and stood before the bookshelf that had once held her childhood favorites. Now, it was a mix of everyone's forgotten paperbacks and dust-coated encyclopedias. She pulled out an old hardcover, The Secret Garden, and opened it to find a photograph tucked inside. It was her and Julian in the backyard, mid-laugh, both of them soaked in a summer sprinkler. Behind them, their father held the garden hose, his grin wide, sun in his hair. She brought it back to the living room and handed it to Julian. He stared at it for a long moment. "I forgot this day," he said. "I didn't," Elise replied. "I just buried it." Julian nodded. "We're unburying a lot lately." Their mother stepped into the room, drying her hands on a towel. She looked at the photograph and smiled a little sadly. "I think he'd be proud," she said. Elise wasn't sure who she meant. Julian, herself, all of them. But in that moment, it didn't matter. They were here. They were together. And for the first time in years, Elise felt something fragile and new blooming inside her. A beginning. Chapter 6. What Stays Behind. It was a Wednesday when Elise finally went up to the attic. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan, revealing a narrow staircase steeped in dust and the scent of time. As children, she and Julian had only ever been allowed up here during storms, when the power went out and they'd camp with flashlights and pillows, pretending the world had ended and they were the only survivors. Now, the space felt smaller. Or maybe she had simply become too big for the version of herself that once played make-believe beneath these eaves. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, casting shifting shadows across forgotten boxes and draped furniture. Elise crouched beside a stack of labeled crates, photos, holidays, dad's stuff, and pulled one toward her. She hadn't planned to come up here, but the feeling had grown like a whisper over the last few days, urging her toward unfinished corners of memory. Inside the box, she found more tapes, not labeled like the others. These were unlabeled, unmarked, their cases scuffed and worn from time. She tucked a few under her arm and made her way back down. In the living room, she dusted off the old tape deck again. Her mother was out shopping, Julian at a part-time freelance gig in Manhattan. For once, Elise was alone in the house. She pressed play. Static crackled for a moment, then cleared to her father's voice, clearer this time, stronger. "This is for Elise. If she ever comes back." She froze. I don't know what you'll remember, sweetheart, or what you'll want to forget. But I hope this finds you when you need it, not when it hurts the most. The sound of a deep breath. You were always so bright, so curious. Even when you were angry, I could tell you wanted to understand the world, not destroy it. I'm sorry I couldn't always be the father you needed. Elise closed her eyes. Tears slipped down before she could stop them. But you were never the problem. Not once. If you carry anything from me, let it be this. You were loved. Even in the silences. Even in the distance. Even when I couldn't find the words. The tape ended. No music. No fade out. Just a click and the hum of the motor winding down. Elise sat still for a long time. Later that night, she told Julian. They stood in the hallway outside their father's study, long untouched, still lined with dusty shelves and old notebooks. I listened to one of the tapes, she said. He made it for me. Julian nodded. I listened to one yesterday. Mine was about how he used to take me to the batting cages. Said he was proud I stopped being afraid of the ball. Elise smiled softly. He always hated the quiet. Maybe that's why he filled the house with his voice. Julian leaned against the wall. Maybe he knew we'd all go quiet without him. Their mother joined them a moment later, returning from the kitchen with 3 mugs of chamomile tea. They sat in the study together, not saying much, just sifting through the layers of their father's life, notes he never published, half-finished crossword puzzles, his favorite pen still tucked into the spine of a book on jazz theory. Elise found another letter. This one was addressed to all of them. To my family. I hope this room still smells like books and old cologne. I hope it still feels like home in the way I meant it to be. Not perfect. Just open. If you're reading this, you've forgiven something. Or you're trying. That's enough. All I ever wanted was for the people I loved to find a way back to each other. Her mother read the letter twice. He was always better with words than I was, she said quietly. You're not bad with them, Elise said. Just careful. I didn't used to be, her mother replied. But after he got sick, I stopped knowing how to be anything but afraid. The admission was raw. It wasn't something they were used to hearing from her. But instead of recoiling, Elise reached out and touched her mother's hand. It's okay, she said. I was afraid too. The old house settled around them as if listening. Outside, a gust of wind stirred the maple tree by the window, scattering a flurry of leaves across the yard. They spent the rest of the night sorting old photos, laughing at hairstyles and ridiculous outfits, piecing together fragments of lives that once felt disconnected. It wasn't neat. It wasn't everything. But it was a beginning. Later, when Elise lay in bed, she thought about what stays behind when people go. Not the furniture, not the silence, but the echoes, the words they leave for you to find when you're ready. She reached for her notebook, opened to a blank page, and started to write. Not just for her father, not even for her mother or Julian. For herself. For the version of her who finally came home. Chapter 7. The Spaces We Share. The first snow arrived quietly. Elise stood by the kitchen window early that morning, sipping her coffee and watching delicate flakes drift down, blanketing the street below. Brooklyn in the snow always looked gentler, like the city had paused its relentless rhythm just long enough to breathe. Her mother joined her a few minutes later, wrapped in a robe, hair tousled from sleep. Neither of them spoke at first. They just stood there, side by side, watching the white layer grow. I used to hate winter, Elise murmured. Her mother turned to her. Because of your birthday? Partly. It always felt like a reminder. Everyone forgot. She paused. You forgot once. Her mother's face tightened slightly. I remember. Elise didn't speak to accuse. It was simply a fact. Something old and sharp, now dulled by time but not erased. I never stopped celebrating it in my own way, her mother said after a beat. I used to bake the cake anyway. Leave a piece out. Ridiculous, I know. Elise shook her head. Not ridiculous. She looked out at the snow again, then reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out another of her father's letters. This one was different, short, barely a paragraph. If you're reading this, then there's still time. Time to say it. Time to hear it. That's all I ever hoped for. That we'd still have time. Elise had been carrying it for days. That afternoon, she found Julian in the garage, elbow deep in a bin of tangled Christmas lights and half-broken ornaments. He looked up, surprised. "Thought you hated decorating," he said. "I did," Elise replied. "But maybe I just hated doing it alone." They worked side by side for hours, untangling lights, dusting off old wreaths, laughing at a truly horrifying papier-mâché reindeer they had made in grade school. Julian pulled out a snow globe, cracked at the base, but still functional. He shook it and watched the flakes swirl around the miniature town inside. "Remember this?" he asked. "Dad used to make us write stories about the people who lived in there," Elise said. "He told me the baker was secretly in love with the mayor." Julian chuckled. "He told me the mayor was secretly a vampire." Sounds about right. By nightfall, the house shimmered with soft lights and old memories. The tree stood in the corner of the living room, crooked but proud. The fireplace crackled. The radio played an old holiday jazz tune, and for the first time in years, the house felt lived in, not like a museum of loss. Elise sat on the couch beside her mother and Julian, their legs tucked under mismatched blankets. On the table in front of them sat 3 mugs of cocoa and a plate of slightly burned sugar cookies. Her mother turned to her, something tentative in her eyes. "Would you ever consider staying? Not forever, but longer." Elise didn't answer right away. She looked around the room, at the clutter and the comfort, and the 3 stockings hanging from the mantel, hers, still dusty but newly added. "I don't know what staying means yet," she said honestly, "but I'm not in a hurry to leave." Her mother reached out, slow and careful, and laid her hand over Elise's. "Then that's enough," she said. Later that night, Elise wandered back to her childhood room. She sat at her old desk, the lamp casting a familiar glow, and pulled out her journal. She began to write again. Not as therapy, not as a letter, just as herself. Words about snow and silences, about what it meant to leave and what it meant to return, about grief that softened, not disappeared, about the echoes of love left behind in everyday things: a cracked mug, an old piano, a reel of forgotten tapes. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something had settled. Not closure, not resolution, but peace. And in the quiet, Elise found herself whole again. Chapter 8. When the light comes in. The days between Christmas and New Year's always felt like a strange kind of limbo, time suspended, the world pausing in anticipation of something new. For Elise, the days blurred gently together, but not in the numbing way they used to. This was different. She was no longer drifting. She was remembering how to stand still. Julian had left for Manhattan again, a short freelance gig with a photography studio. Their mother was resting more, some days better than others. The hospital follow-ups were still looming, but for now, they lived in the gentle peace of not knowing. It was Elise's idea to clean out the sunroom. It had been her father's favorite place, the smallest, brightest room in the house. For years it had become a storage space for forgotten boxes and furniture with nowhere else to go. Elise opened the door one morning and let the winter lights fill in. Dust hung in the air like ghosts, but it wasn't unpleasant. It smelled like old wood and dried lavender. She rolled up her sleeves and began. She found stacks of sheet music, most of it handwritten in her father's narrow, looping script. Half of them were unfinished, lyrics trailing off midline, melodies without bridges. It felt like reading someone's thoughts mid-sentence. Elise set them aside carefully, as if touching them too roughly might erase him further. Behind a crate, she found an old leather-bound notebook. The cover cracked with age, the pages yellowed and soft. Inside were journal entries. Some dated back to her childhood. Elise asked today why the sky is blue. I didn't give her the scientific answer. I told her it's because that's the color her laughter makes when it fills a room. She laughed through tears. Further down the page. I don't know how to help her when she closes in, but I see it in her eyes, the storm. I hope one day she forgives me for not being able to calm it. By the time Julian returned that evening, the sunroom had been transformed. The boxes were gone, the floor swept, and in the corner, the old armchair had been placed next to the window, a folded blanket draped over its side. Wow, Julian said, stepping inside. It feels like him in here. Elise nodded. I think it always did. They sat on the floor, sorting through the music and letters, talking softly about what they remembered and what they wished they hadn't forgotten. That night, Elise brought the notebook to her mother. She found her in the living room, reading in her usual spot. Elise handed her the leather-bound book without a word and sat beside her as she opened it. Page after page, her mother turned slowly, her fingers trembling. At one point, she stopped and covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling behind her glasses. I didn't know he wrote any of this, she whispered. He never let me read his journals. I think he was saving this one for us, Elise said. Her mother looked at her with soft wonder. You always thought he understood you more than I did. Elise met her gaze. He did, but I think maybe it wasn't understanding I needed. Just someone to stay. Her mother closed the journal, wrapped her arms around it gently, and leaned back. I'm still learning how to stay, she said. Even now. That's okay, Elise replied. So am I. On New Year's Eve, they sat on the front stoop wrapped in blankets, sipping hot cider and watching the quiet snow fall under the streetlights. No parties. No noise. Just the hum of the city in the distance and the silence of a family finding its rhythm again. Remember when we used to write down resolutions and hide them in the piano bench? Julian asked. I think mine were the same every year, Elise said with a smile. Run away. Grow wings. Never come back. Her mother laughed, softly. And yet, Elise echoed. They watched as midnight ticked closer, the world holding its breath before the first second of the new year. At 11:58, Elise stood up, walked inside, and returned with 3 scraps of paper. New tradition, she said. Write one thing you're ready to leave behind. We'll burn them at midnight. They scribbled in silence. When the clock struck 12, they stood over a small tin can in the snow-covered garden. Julian lit the match. One by one, the slips of paper caught fire and disappeared into smoke and warmth. The past didn't vanish with them, but some way did. Elise looked up at the dark sky, stars sharp and scattered, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like running. She felt like staying. Chapter 9. What we choose to keep. It was the kind of winter morning that hinted at spring. The snow had melted in uneven patches along the sidewalk, and faint birdsong filtered through the open kitchen window. Elise stood barefoot on the cold tile floor, slicing apples for a pie. She wasn't sure why she felt the need to bake. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was because her mother had once told her, baking is a way of telling time when everything else feels uncertain. Julian sat at the table, scrolling through photos on his camera. His work had picked up again, and he was planning to leave for a shoot in Boston in a few days. But for now he was home. They both were. Still can't believe you found Dad's tapes, he said, breaking the silence. Elise smiled. They were labeled as taxes. Very clever. They had listened to them late one night in the sunroom, soft, grainy recordings of their father humming half-finished melodies, reading aloud lines from his favorite books, and, occasionally, talking as if someone, perhaps them, was meant to hear it one day. If you've made it this far, then maybe we're all a little braver than we thought. It felt like time travel. Like a message from someone who had already accepted the ending and left breadcrumbs behind, just in case someone came looking. I've been thinking about staying, Elise said, her hands still busy with the pie crust. Longer than I planned. Julian looked up, surprised, then thoughtful. This place could use you, he said. Mom could use you. I don't want to stay just because she needs me. Then don't. Stay because it feels right. She paused. It doesn't feel easy. Most things that matter don't. They finished the pie together, laughing when the crust refused to cooperate. When they pulled it from the oven later, slightly lopsided but fragrant and golden, her mother walked in, eyes wide with surprise. "You baked?" she asked Elise. "Don't act so shocked," Elise replied, pretending to be offended. "I have layers." "Like the crust," Julian added. "Flaky but warm." They all laughed, an easy sound, unguarded. It settled in the house like sunlight. Later that week, Elise found herself walking the streets of Brooklyn alone, slipping back into the city's rhythm. She passed her old bookstore, now a trendy cafe. She stepped into Prospect Park and stood by the duck pond where she once read books and wrote terrible poetry as a teenager. Life had moved on. The city hadn't waited for her. But something inside her was no longer chasing escape. She wasn't here to reclaim a past. She was here because the present had finally made room for her. At home, she began sorting through her father's old studio. It had been untouched for years, shelves full of notes, recordings, and instruments. Among them, Elise found a half-repaired guitar and a folder labeled for E. Inside were song drafts, poems, chords scribbled in haste. One sheet bore a single sentence in her father's handwriting. "Some songs take longer to finish because they wait for you to come home." She sat down, strummed a few soft notes, and started humming the melody. No longer afraid of the silence. No longer afraid of staying. Chapter 10. Home. Still becoming. Snow had melted entirely now, leaving the sidewalks wet and the air brisk with the promise of spring. Buds peeked from tree branches like shy thoughts, and the sun stayed a little longer each evening, casting golden spills of light across the brownstone's windows. Elise stood on the front stoop, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood stretch awake. It had been nearly 3 months since she returned to Brooklyn. At first, each day felt borrowed, an experiment in forgiveness and patience. But now, something had shifted. Not all at once, but slowly, like thawing ice. Inside, the house hummed with quiet life. Her mother was upstairs, humming a hymn while organizing the attic. Julian had left for Boston 2 days earlier, but his laughter still echoed in the hallway, and the Polaroids he'd taken now lined the kitchen wall like a mosaic of small, good moments. The guitar Elise had found in her father's studio sat beside the upright piano. She'd rest-strung it herself, guided by YouTube videos and memories. Most evenings, she played, sometimes alone, sometimes while her mother read, occasionally in the middle of a quiet conversation that trailed off into shared silence. And then there were the letters. She hadn't read them all yet, the ones her mother had written but never sent. She took them in slowly, one at a time, often in the sunroom with a blanket across her knees. They weren't apologies, not really. They were something better, attempts. A woman trying to reach her daughter the only way she could. One afternoon, Elise brought out her own box of unsent letters, scraps of paper and emails she never clicked send on, all written to the version of her mother she never believed would listen. Together, they read, laughed, cried. Not all wounds healed in the open air, but they had stopped pretending they weren't bleeding. That, Elise had learned, was where healing began. March came with cherry blossoms blooming in Prospect Park. Elise and her mother walked slowly down the path, paper coffee cups warming their hands. "I've been thinking," her mother said, watching a golden retriever dart across the grass. "Dangerous," Elise teased. Her mother smiled. "About what's next?" "For you." Elise paused, then said, "I have too. And I don't know everything yet, but I think I want to teach. Writing, maybe? At the community center." Her mother blinked in surprise. "You always said you'd never teach." "I know, but I think maybe I just needed time to become someone who could." "You already are." Elise looked at her mother. She was thinner than she remembered, more tired, but lighter somehow, as though something had been knotted inside her. You think you'll stay? Her mother asked. Elise nodded. Not just here, but in my life. I want to stop standing on the edge of things. Her mother reached out and gently took her hand. I'm glad you came home, she said. Elise squeezed her fingers. Me too. Weeks later, Elise stood in a circle of folding chairs at the Brooklyn Community Center. A group of teens surrounded her, notebooks open, pens tapping anxiously. I don't care if you think it's messy, she told them. Write the truth, even if it scares you. Especially if it scares you. That's where the best stories begin. One student raised her hand. Even if I don't know how it ends? Elise smiled. That's the point. You write to find out. She left the center that evening feeling something she hadn't in years, not just peace, but purpose. When she got home, the brownstone glowed with warmth. Dinner simmered on the stove. Her mother called out from the hallway, asking how her day went. Elise answered, setting down her bag, untying her scarf, and breathing in the scent of rosemary and lemon. The world was still uncertain. Her mother's health was fragile, her own future unwritten. But for the first time, Elise wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was living in it with both feet, both hands, and her whole heart. And she was home. Not the place. The becoming. Epilogue. The quiet after. It was summer now. The brownstone no longer felt like a memory museum, but a home lived in again. Light filled the kitchen in the mornings, and the old radiator still clanked at night like an old friend refusing to be forgotten. The ivy along the backyard wall had crept further up the brick, and Elise found herself welcoming its persistence. Julian returned from Boston with a series of black and white portraits, some of strangers, others of the neighborhood. One of Elise, taken without her knowing, sat on the living room mantel. She stood under the cherry blossoms in Prospect Park, looking up at the sky, mid-laugh, unaware the camera had caught something so unguarded. Her mother, though slower now, had taken up painting again. Not the sweeping oils she once obsessed over, but watercolors, soft, tender strokes of sky and kitchen table scenes. She often left the finished works on the windowsill to dry, the edges curling slightly in the heat. One evening, they sat on the roof together, Elise, her mother, and Julian. The skyline glimmered in the distance, and somewhere below, the hum of music drifted from an open window. I used to think we lost something, Elise said quietly. Back then. We did, her mother replied. But we didn't lose everything. Julian added, sometimes I think we had to let it all break before we could figure out what was worth rebuilding. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that felt full instead of empty. Later that night, Elise stood by the upright piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys, then moved instinctively chords her father used to hum, a melody unfinished for years. She played gently, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. A new verse emerged, one that didn't need to sound perfect, only honest. The seasons changed again. Elise's creative writing classes at the center were now full. Word spread quickly that she didn't just teach structure, she helped students find their voices. Some of them came from homes that echoed the quiet she once knew. Some just needed someone to believe in the sentence they were trying to finish. One afternoon, a student gave her a poem that ended with the line, "Sometimes the silence is the beginning of the song." Elise read it twice before smiling. She pinned it to the corkboard above her desk. She still had bad days when she woke with old weight in her chest or got lost in thought while doing the dishes. But they didn't define her anymore. They passed like weather, and she let them pass. Because now she had a rhythm. A place. A life that wasn't running away from anything, but rooted in the small, stubborn joy of choosing to stay. And sometimes, when the wind came through the open window just right, she could hear the faint echo of her father's voice in the music she played, as if whispering, "You came home. You found your way back. Now keep going." And she did. The end.